The hermit's solitude. Elias had always preferred the company of trees and animals over people. Deep in the heart of a forest that stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, he had built a small cabin. It was simple, made of wood he cut himself, and stood as a testament to his rejection of the noisy, chaotic world beyond the trees. Here, the air was fresh, the nights were quiet, and the world felt untouched by human greed. For 5 years, Elias lived this way, his days filled with chopping wood, fishing, and tending to his small garden. At night, he read old, worn-out books by candlelight. He had no phone, no internet, and no visitors. It was the peace he had craved, the isolation he believed would protect him from the pain of human connections. But peace is a fragile thing. It started with a sound, a deep, rumbling noise that didn't belong in the forest. Elias, sitting on his porch with a cup of herbal tea, frowned as the noise grew louder, rumbling like a distant avalanche. He stood up, his heart pounding. The stars above seemed to brighten. Then one suddenly streaked across the sky. A meteor, perhaps. The streak of light didn't fade away like it should have. Instead, it grew brighter, larger, and hurtled toward the forest with terrifying speed. Elias watched in stunned silence as it crashed with a deafening roar a few miles away. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and a shockwave of heat rippled through the trees. What the hell was that? Elias muttered, grabbing his old lantern and a hunting knife. He hadn't seen another person in years, and he had no intention of letting whatever just landed disrupt his sanctuary. He followed the trail of destruction through the forest, his lantern casting flickering light on the broken branches and scorched earth. Smoke rose in the distance, and the air smelled of burned wood and something else, something metallic, almost electric. When Elias reached the crash site, his breath caught. A sleek, metallic pod lay half buried in the dirt, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Strange symbols were etched along its sides, glowing faintly like they were alive. Sparks flickered from the pod's damaged edges, and steam hissed as the metal cooled. "What in the world?" Elias whispered, stepping closer. He prodded the pod with the tip of his knife. Suddenly, a section of the pod slid open with a soft hiss, and a ramp extended to the ground. Elias stumbled back, heart hammering, as a figure emerged from the smoke-filled interior. It was a woman, or at least she looked like one. Her skin had a faint silvery hue that shimmered under the moonlight, and her eyes glowed softly, like distant stars. Her hair flowed like liquid gold, and her tattered clothing hinted at something regal, almost royal. She staggered forward, clutching her side. "Help! Me," she said, her voice trembling but musical, like a melody carried on the wind. Elias froze. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. This couldn't be real. Aliens weren't real. But the woman, this alien, collapsed at his feet, her breathing shallow. Before he could process what was happening, the forest around them erupted with sounds, low, guttural growls, and the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. Elias turned, his grip tightening on his knife. He couldn't see what was out there, but he could feel it. Something, or someone, was coming. "Who's out there?" he shouted, his voice steady despite the fear creeping up his spine. The alien woman grabbed his ankle weakly. "They're coming. For me. Please, don't let them take me." Her voice was barely audible, but the desperation in it struck a chord deep within him. Elias didn't know who they were, but he knew one thing. He didn't want to stick around to find out. Ignoring every instinct screaming at him to run back to his cabin and lock the door, he bent down and hoisted the alien woman into his arms. "Don't make me regret this," he muttered. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by strange, mechanical whirring sounds. Shadows moved between the trees, and faint, glowing red eyes pierced the darkness. Elias sprinted back toward his cabin, his lantern swinging wildly, and the alien woman limp in his arms. By the time he reached the cabin, his lungs burned, and his legs felt like jelly. He kicked the door open and set the alien woman on his small cot. Grabbing a shotgun he hadn't touched in years, he turned to face the door, his heart pounding like a drum. Outside, the forest fell silent. Too silent. Elias's hands trembled as he aimed the shotgun at the door. He could feel it. Whatever was out there wasn't human. And they weren't leaving without a fight. The alien woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at him, her gaze filled with a strange mix of gratitude and sorrow. "You've already chosen," she whispered. Before Elias could ask what she meant, the door rattled violently. Something was trying to get in. The royal secret. The cabin was silent except for the faint crackle of the fireplace. Elias sat on a wooden stool, staring at the alien woman lying on his cot. Her breathing had steadied, but she remained unconscious, her strange silver skin glowing faintly in the firelight. He leaned closer, his rough hands hovering uncertainly near her face. Was she even real? A sudden gasp broke the silence. Her eyes shot open, large, luminous, and golden like twin suns. She bolted upright, her gaze darting around the small cabin, and then fixed on him. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice smooth but trembling. "You're in my cabin," Elias replied, leaning back cautiously. "You crash-landed in the forest. Who are you, and why are you here?" The alien woman didn't answer immediately. She touched her side, where her tattered clothing revealed a wound. "I need time," she whispered. "Time." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Lady, I don't know what you are, but you don't have time. Something was chasing you. They nearly tore my door down to get to you." Her golden eyes softened, and she seemed to consider him for a moment. "You saved me," she said, almost as though she couldn't believe it. Elias sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "Yeah, I did. And now I want answers." She hesitated, then said, "My name is Lyra. I was the rightful heir to the Zarathian throne." Elias blinked. "The what now?" Lyra straightened, her regal posture returning despite the modest surroundings. "I am a princess of the Zarathian Empire, a federation that spans galaxies. I came to Earth to escape a coup. My own people betrayed me, and now bounty hunters track me to ensure I never reclaim my throne." Elias stared at her, his expression unreadable. "A princess," he muttered. "Of course. Why not? Makes as much sense as anything else that's happened tonight." Lyra frowned, clearly unamused. "You don't believe me." Elias snorted. "Lady, I've been living in these woods for 5 years. The craziest thing I've seen is a bear stealing my fish. And now you show up, glowing like a lightning bug, saying you're royalty from outer space. Forgive me if I'm a little skeptical." Lyra winced but didn't argue. Instead, she reached into the folds of her torn garments and retrieved a small, crystalline device. It hovered above her palm, spinning slowly and emitting a soft hum. A holographic image appeared, a vast galaxy with countless stars and planets, all connected by glowing lines. "This is the Zarathian Empire," Lyra said softly, her voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. "And this," she zoomed in on a single shimmering planet, "is my home, Zurith Prime." Elias stared at the hologram, his skepticism melting into awe. "Okay," he said slowly, "maybe you're not crazy. But why Earth? Why here?" Lyra closed her hand, and the device disappeared. "Earth is far from the Empire's core. It's remote, undeveloped, and of little strategic value. But more than that," she paused, her gaze meeting his, "I've studied humans, your resilience, your resourcefulness. It fascinates me. I knew I'd have a chance to survive here." Elias scoffed. "You've got a funny way of showing it. Dropping into my forest with a bunch of killers on your tail doesn't exactly scream survival plan." Lyra's expression darkened. "I didn't expect them to follow me so quickly. They've upgraded their tracking technology. We're not safe here." As if on cue, a faint peeping sound echoed from the corner of the cabin. Elias turned, spotting a small device on the floor. It was blinking red. "What the hell is that?" he asked, standing up. Lyra's eyes widened. "A tracker. It must have been activated during the crash." Elias cursed under his breath. "So, what? They're coming here now." Lyra nodded grimly. "We need to leave. Immediately." Elias grabbed his shotgun and a backpack of supplies. "Great, just what I needed. A royal alien and a death squad in my backyard. What's the plan?" Lyra hesitated, then said, "There's a safe house not far from here. I set it up years ago in case I ever needed to escape to Earth. If we can get there, I can call for help." "Years ago?" Elias asked, surprised. "Yes," Lyra admitted. "I've been watching Earth for a long time." Elias didn't have time to process her words. The faint sound of footsteps reached his ears, heavy, metallic, and unrelenting. "They're here," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Elias gritted his teeth. "Then let's move." He threw open the back door, leading Lyra into the dense forest. The shadows seemed alive, and the air crackled with tension. Behind them, the cabin exploded in a fiery blast, illuminating the night like a second sunrise. Lyra stumbled, but Elias caught her arm. "No stopping now, princess. If you want to survive, you'd better keep up." The two vanished into the darkness, the hunters close on their trail. The Great Escape. The forest was alive with danger. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every snap of a twig made Elias's heart race. He moved swiftly but cautiously, leading Lyra through a labyrinth of towering trees and dense undergrowth. The moonlight struggled to penetrate the canopy, casting eerie patterns on the ground. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were relentless. Metallic clicks, guttural growls, and the hum of alien machinery. Elias glanced over his shoulder, his grip tightening on the hunting knife he carried. "Do your bounty hunters ever quit?" he muttered. "They won't stop until I'm dead," Lyra replied, her voice trained but resolute. "Comforting," Elias grumbled. The pair reached a shallow stream, its water shimmering faintly in the moonlight. Elias gestured for Lyra to stop, crouching to inspect the ground. Years of living in the wilderness had taught him how to hide his trail, and he wasn't about to let a pack of alien hunters outsmart him. "Step where I step," he instructed. "The water will mask our tracks." Lyra nodded, following him into the icy stream. The cold water bit at Elias's legs, but he pressed on, his focus razor-sharp. Lyra stumbled, her movements clumsy compared to his practiced grace. "You okay back there?" he asked without turning. "I'm fine," she said, though her tone betrayed her exhaustion. They moved along the stream for what felt like hours, the noise of their pursuers fading into the distance. Elias finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. "All right," he said, stepping onto the bank. "We've got a little time, but not much. Where's this safe house of yours?" Lyra hesitated. "It's not far," she said, avoiding his gaze. Elias frowned. "Not far as in 10 minutes, or not far as in 10 miles. Closer to the latter," she admitted. Elias ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Great, just great. You're lucky I didn't have anything better to do tonight." Lyra's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "I didn't ask for your help, human. You chose to save me." Elias opened his mouth to reply, but the distant sound of a low-pitched hum stopped him. It was a sound he hadn't heard before, mechanical, alien, and menacing. "They've deployed a scanner drone," Lyra whispered, her voice tight with fear. "A what now?" "A drone designed to detect organic life forms. It'll find us in minutes unless we—" Before she could finish, a bright beam of light swept through the forest, cutting through the trees like a knife. Elias grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her down behind a fallen log, pressing a finger to his lips. The drone's beam moved closer, accompanied by the unmistakable whir of its engines. Elias's mind raced. He wasn't a soldier or a hero, just a hermit who wanted to be left alone. Yet here he was, hiding from a piece of alien tech with a glowing alien princess by his side. The irony wasn't lost on him. "What do we do?" he whispered, barely audible. Lyra reached into her tattered cloak and pulled out a small spherical device. "I can disable it, but I'll need you to distract it first." Elias stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Distract it? Do I look like a decoy to you?" Lyra didn't reply, her golden eyes locking onto his. There was a determination in her gaze that left no room for argument. "Fine," Elias muttered, gripping his knife. "But if I get vaporized, I'm haunting you." He slipped out from behind a log, moving stealthily through the underbrush. The drone's light swept over the area, and Elias threw a rock into the opposite direction. The drone immediately turned, its beam focused on the sound. "Now," Elias hissed. Lyra emerged from the shadows, activating the device. It emitted a high-pitched pulse, and the drone froze midair. Sparks erupted from its body, and it crashed to the ground in a heap of metal and wires. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You could have mentioned you had that thing earlier." "I didn't trust you yet," Lyra said simply. "Trust me. I've been saving your royal butt all night." Lyra didn't respond, but the ghost of a smile played on her lips. For a brief moment, Elias thought she might even thank him. But the sound of distant footsteps cut the moment short. "They'll know the drone is down," Lyra said, her tone serious. "We need to move." Elias nodded, his frustration giving way to grim determination. "Lead the way, princess. But next time, try not to make friends with the kind of people who send killer robots after you." Lyra glanced at him, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. "If we survive this, I'll explain everything." "Looking forward to it," Elias muttered, following her deeper into the forest as the hunters closed in once more. A new world. Elias stumbled through the dense forest, his breath coming in short bursts. The air smelled of damp earth and burnt wood, remnants of the chaos they'd narrowly escaped. His mind raced, trying to piece together the absurdity of his situation. A hermit on the run with an alien princess while being hunted by high-tech assassins. "Keep moving," Lyra urged, her voice sharp but strained. She clutched her side where her silvery blood had seeped through her tattered clothing. "You don't need to tell me twice," Elias shot back. "Where is this magical safe house you keep talking about?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her cloak and pulled out a small circular device. She pressed it, and a faint pulse of light rippled through the forest. "What was that?" Elias asked, instinctively gripping his knife. "A signal," Lyra replied. "It'll reveal the entrance." Elias was about to question her further when the ground beneath them began to tremble. At first, it felt like a mild earthquake, but then the earth itself seemed to shift. Just ahead, a section of the forest floor split apart, revealing a staircase that spiraled downward into a glowing blue abyss. "You've got to be kidding me," Elias muttered. "Welcome to my refuge," Lyra said, already descending the stairs. Elias hesitated. Every survival instinct he'd honed over the years screamed at him to stay above ground, to never step into the unknown. But the sound of approaching footsteps in the distance left him no choice. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, following her down. As they descended, the glow grew brighter, illuminating sleek metallic walls embedded with intricate patterns. The air was cooler here, humming with a faint energy that made the hair on the back of Elias's neck stand up. At the bottom of the staircase, a large, circular chamber opened up before them. It was like stepping into another world. The walls were lined with shimmering consoles that displayed alien symbols, and strange crystalline structures pulsed with light in rhythmic patterns. This is your safe house?" Elias asked, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Lyra nodded, moving to one of the consoles. Her hands moved swiftly, tapping symbols that glowed brighter with each touch. "It's an outpost I established years ago. Earth was always my contingency plan." Years ago, Elias asked, his brow furrowing. How long have you been watching us? Long enough, Lyra replied, her tone guarded. Your planet fascinates me. Its people, its resilience. It's unlike any other world in the galaxy. Elias snorted. Fascinating. We're a mess. Lyra's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Perhaps, but even in chaos, there is beauty. Before Elias could respond, the consoles flickered and a warning tone filled the chamber. Lyra's face tightened. What now? Elias asked, already regretting the question. They've tracked us here, Lyra said, her fingers flying across the console. The bounty hunters are using advanced interference technology to locate the safe house. It's only a matter of time before they breach the perimeter. Of course they are, Elias muttered. So what's the plan? Do we just wait here and hope they get bored? Lyra shot him a sharp look. No. We fight back. Elias blinked. Fight back? With what? You've got fancy walls and glowing crystals, but I don't see any weapons. Lyra stepped to a crystalline structure in the corner of the room and placed her hand on it. The crystal shifted, revealing a hidden compartment filled with sleek alien devices. She handed one to Elias. What is this? He asked, inspecting the strange, gun-like object. A disruptor, Lyra said. It'll neutralize their tech, but only at close range. You'll need to be precise. Elias sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fantastic. No pressure. As the warning tones grew louder, the room began to shake. Lyra activated a holographic display, showing red blips closing in on their location. They'll be here in minutes, she said, her voice calm but urgent. Elias adjusted his grip on the disruptor. Any chance your safe house has a back door? Lyra shook her head. The only way out is through them. Elias chuckled humorlessly. Of course it is. All right, princess. Let's see if your fascination with humans was worth it. As the first explosion rocked the chamber, Elias took a deep breath. He wasn't a soldier, and he certainly wasn't a hero, but in this moment he realized he didn't have to be. Sometimes survival meant standing your ground. Trust tested. The night was deathly quiet as Elias and Lyra crouched behind the ruins of an old stone bridge deep in the forest. The safe house was gone, its advanced walls and consoles obliterated in a single devastating explosion. The bounty hunters had wasted no time tearing through it, forcing them to flee once again. Elias's hands trembled as he adjusted his grip on the alien disruptor Lyra had given him. The sleek, silver weapon felt unnatural in his calloused hands, a stark reminder of just how far outside his comfort zone he'd been dragged. He shot a sideways glance at Lyra, who was inspecting a small crystalline tracker in her hand. You sure this thing isn't leading them straight to us? Elias asked, his voice low but sharp. Lyra's golden eyes flicked to him, narrowing slightly. The tracker is inert. I deactivated it before we left the safe house, and we're supposed to believe that. Elias pressed, his frustration bubbling over. Because every time we stop running, they show up like clockwork. Lyra bristled at his accusation. Are you implying I've betrayed us? Elias snorted. I'm not implying anything, princess. I'm saying it outright. For all I know, you're leading them to me on purpose. Lyra's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of something else. Hurt, perhaps. I would never do that, she said quietly. Elias scoffed. Forgive me if I don't take your word for it. I didn't exactly ask to be dragged into your intergalactic drama. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The sounds of the forest seemed impossibly loud. The rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the faint hum of the hunter's drones searching nearby. Finally, Lyra broke the silence. Do you think I'd wanted this? To be hunted like an animal? To drag an innocent bystander into my fight? Elias looked at her, surprised by the raw emotion in her voice. I didn't choose to lose everything. Lyra continued, her voice trembling. My family, my home, My people, all gone because of greed and betrayal. If I trusted you enough to bring you into this, it's because I believe you can help me." Elias stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He wanted to argue, to point out how absurd this all was, but something in her voice stopped him. It wasn't just desperation, it was honesty. Before he could respond, a high-pitched whine split the air. Both of them froze as a drone's light beam swept over the bridge, illuminating the crumbling stones. "Move," Lyra hissed, grabbing his arm. The two darted into the shadows just as the drone fired, its pulse shattering the stone bridge behind them. Elias cursed under his breath, his legs burning as he sprinted through the dense forest with Lyra close behind. "Got any more safe houses lying around?" Elias shouted over his shoulder. "No," Lyra replied, her voice strained. "But there's a cave system nearby. It'll buy us time." "A cave system. Great. Because that worked so well last time," Elias muttered. They reached the edge of a rocky cliff, and Lyra pointed to a narrow path leading downward. "There," she said, already moving. Elias followed reluctantly, his every instinct screaming that this was a trap. But as they descended into the dark, twisting tunnels of the cave, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not by Lyra, but by something else. Once they were deep inside, Lyra activated a small orb that emitted a soft, blue light. The cave walls glittered faintly, revealing strange, alien markings carved into the stone. "What is this place?" Elias asked, his voice echoing. Lyra hesitated. "It's old. Very old. My people once visited Earth centuries ago. This was one of our observation sites." Elias frowned. "So you've been spying on us for centuries. That's comforting." Lyra ignored his jab, her attention focused on the markings. "These symbols," she said softly, tracing them with her fingers. "They tell of an alliance, one that was never fulfilled." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Alliance? Between your people and humans?" "Yes," Lyra replied, turning to him. "My ancestors saw potential in your kind. They believed that one day humans would be pivotal in shaping the galaxy's future." Elias crossed his arms. "And you believe that, too?" Lyra's golden eyes met his. "I didn't," she admitted. "Not until I met you." Elias opened his mouth to reply, but a low rumble cut him off. The cave trembled, and faint red lights appeared at the entrance. The hunters had found them. "Great timing," Elias muttered, gripping the disruptor tightly. Lyra activated the orb's full brightness, illuminating a hidden passage deeper into the cave. "This way," she said urgently. Elias hesitated for only a second before following her. As they disappeared into the darkness, the hunters' voices echoed behind them, their mechanical tones chilling in the silence. "You better have a plan, Princess," Elias muttered. Lyra glanced at him, a determined fire in her eyes. "Trust me," she said. For the first time, Elias wasn't sure if he could. The final stand. The cave trembled as the hunters' footsteps echoed closer, their metallic boots clanking against the stone floor. Elias pressed his back against the cold wall, clutching the disruptor tightly. Beside him, Lyra's golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the alien orb she carried. "We're running out of places to hide," Elias muttered, his voice low but sharp. "We're not hiding anymore," Lyra replied, her tone resolute. She knelt beside a section of the cave wall, tracing her fingers over ancient, glowing symbols etched into the stone. "What are you doing?" Elias asked, glancing nervously toward the entrance of the cavern. "Preparing," she said simply. Elias opened his mouth to question her further, but the sound of an energy weapon charging froze the words in his throat. A red beam shot past them, narrowly missing his head and scorching the wall behind him. "Time's up," Elias shouted, diving behind a boulder for cover. The first of the hunters emerged, its sleek, armored body reflecting the faint light of the cave. Its glowing red eyes scanned the room, locking onto Elias's position. Without hesitation, it raised its weapon. Elias fired the disruptor, the alien device humming as it discharged a pulse of energy. The shot hit the hunter square in the chest, causing its armor to flicker and short-circuit. The hunter staggered but didn't fall. "Of course it's not that easy," Elias muttered. Lyra stood abruptly, her hands glowing with an energy Elias hadn't seen before. She shouted something in a language he couldn't understand, and the symbols on the cave walls erupted with light. A wave of energy surged through the room, throwing the hunters backward. "What the hell was that?" Elias asked, staring at her in shock. "An ancient defense mechanism," Lyra said, her voice strained. "But it won't hold them for long. We have to act now." "Act how?" Elias snapped. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and apparently one magic cave trick away from getting vaporized." Lyra stepped closer, her expression calm despite the chaos. "There's a ship buried deeper in these tunnels, a relic from my people's last visit to Earth. If we can reach it, we can escape." "A ship?" Elias repeated, his disbelief evident. "Yes," Lyra said, already moving toward a hidden passage that had opened when the symbols activated. "But it won't fly without a pilot." Elias followed her, the sound of the hunters recovering spurring him on. "Let me guess, you want me to fly it?" Lyra glanced back at him. "Can you?" "Not even remotely," Elias said, ducking as another energy blast streaked past him. "But I don't see any better options." The passageway twisted and turned, the walls glowing faintly with the same alien markings. The air grew cooler, and a faint hum filled the space, growing louder with each step. Finally, they emerged into a massive chamber. In the center stood a ship unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Its sleek, organic design seemed to pulse with life, and its surface shimmered like liquid metal. "That's our ride?" Elias asked, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Lyra nodded, placing her hand on the ship's hull. The vessel responded instantly, a doorway sliding open with a soft hiss. "Hurry," she urged. Elias climbed aboard, his heart pounding. The interior of the ship was just as alien as its exterior, smooth, seamless, and glowing with an otherworldly light. Lyra moved quickly to the control console, her fingers flying over holographic panels. "This ship is old," she said, frowning. "It'll take time to power up." "How much time?" Elias asked, peering out a small viewport. Lyra hesitated. "More than we have." As if on cue, the hunters burst into the chamber, their weapons raised. Elias ducked instinctively as a barrage of energy blasts lit up the room. "Get us out of here," he shouted. "I'm trying." Lyra snapped, her voice tinged with panic. Elias turned to face the hunters, his disruptor shaking in his hands. He fired wildly, hitting one of them square in the chest. The hunter fell, its body sparking and twitching. "Two down, who knows how many to go," Elias muttered grimly. The ship began to hum louder, its lights growing brighter. Lyra's fingers flew across the controls, her focus unshakable. "Brace yourself," she shouted. Before Elias could ask what she meant, the ship lurched violently, a surge of energy radiating outward. The hunters were thrown backward, their weapons clattering to the ground. The ship's engines roared to life, and with a deafening burst, it shot upward, leaving the chamber and the hunters behind. Elias collapsed into his seat, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "Please tell me that's the last of them." Lyra didn't answer immediately. She stared out the viewport, her expression unreadable. "They'll keep coming," she said finally. "But for now, we're safe." Elias leaned back, closing his eyes. "Safe. That's a word I never thought I'd hear again." Lyra turned to him, her golden eyes softening. "Thank you, Elias. You've done more than I could have ever asked." "Yeah, well," Elias said with a tired smile. "Next time, let's skip the death squads and start with the spaceship, huh?" Lyra chuckled softly, a sound that almost made the chaos worth it. Almost. A new beginning. The ship hummed softly as it drifted through the vast darkness of space. Stars glittered like diamonds against an endless void, and Earth was now a small blue dot far behind them. Elias slumped into a chair, staring blankly out the viewport. His hand still trembled from the adrenaline of the fight, but for the first time in hours, silence surrounded them. Lyra stood at the controls, her fingers gliding over the holographic panels. Her golden eyes were fixed on a distant point in space, her expression unreadable. Elias broke the silence first. "So what now, princess? Do we just keep running until your bounty hunters get tired of chasing us?" Lyra turned, her gaze softening as it met his. "No," she said quietly. "Now we fight back." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Fight back? You've got one ship, no backup, and me, a hermit who can barely pilot a canoe, let alone an alien spaceship, not exactly an army." Lyra's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You underestimate yourself, Elias. You've proven you're far more capable than you think." Elias chuckled humorlessly. "If by capable, you mean lucky enough to not get vaporized, sure. But what about you? What's your plan? Reclaim your throne? Start a revolution?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't know," she admitted. "My people think I'm dead. The ones who betrayed me control everything now. Even if I return, I can't do it alone." Elias sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Well, that's the problem with power. Once someone else has it, they don't give it up easily." Silence fell between them again, but it was interrupted by a soft chime from the ship's console. Lyra turned back to the controls, her expression sharpening. "What is it?" Elias asked, sitting up. "A signal," Lyra said, her voice laced with both hope and caution. "It's faint, but it's from one of my loyalists. They survived." Elias frowned. "How can you be sure it's not a trap?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she brought up a holographic display, showing a star map with a single blinking point. "This signal uses an old Zarethian code, one only my closest allies would know." Elias crossed his arms. "So we go to them, and then what? Hope they've got an army stashed somewhere." Lyra turned to him, her golden eyes burning with determination. "It's a start. With their help, I can rally more loyalists, expose the traitors, and rebuild what was lost." Elias sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You make it sound simple." "It won't be," Lyra admitted, "but I have to try. And—" she hesitated, her voice softening. "I can't do it without you." Elias blinked, taken aback. "Me? I'm just a guy who wanted to live in the woods and be left alone. I'm not a hero, Lyra." "No," she said, stepping closer. "But you are brave, resourceful, loyal, everything I need in an ally." Elias looked away, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to laugh. Him, a hermit who'd spent years avoiding people, now being asked to help save an alien empire. But another part of him, the part that had faced down bounty hunters and stood by Lyra's side, felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. "Fine," he said finally. "But if I'm doing this, I have a few ground rules." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" Elias grinned. "No more glowing trackers, no more surprise explosions, and if you've got any more secret spaceships, I want to know about them up front." Lyra chuckled, a sound that lightened the tension in the room. "Agreed." As the ship's engines roared to life, Elias took one last look out the viewport. The stars stretched endlessly before them, each one a promise of something new. "Guess the quiet life wasn't meant for me after all," he muttered. Lyra smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "The adventure is just beginning."